Adyahi hidanagama trishnam Gurusat buddhim manasidi trishnam Yalabase nija karmo patam Vitam tena vinodaya chitam Bhaja govindam, bhaja govindam Bhaja govindam mudamate Samprapte sannite kale Nahi nahi rakshati dukren karene
Om Hiranmaye Parikoshe Virajan Brahmanishkalam Tachu Brahm Jyotisham Jyoti Tadyadatma Vidho Vidhu Shining like burnished gold, highest and deepest, the core intelligence of living beings, partless and indivisible, free of all taint, the essence of everything which all beings seek, either knowingly or unknowingly. There shines Brahman. It is that which the Guru teaches. It is that which the wise ones exult in. Om peace, peace, peace. Many there are who have never heard of the great self, the Atman, within. Many others, though they hear of it, fail to comprehend it. Fortunate is that one who hears of it. Wonderful is the one who speaks of it. But extremely blessed is that one who, having heard of it from the lips of an illumined teacher, is able to realize it here and now, in this very lifetime. Om peace. Peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvavahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Namaste, everyone, and aloha from Hawaii, where we meet at the SRV Ashram to transmit a second class on the non-touch yoga, Gaudapada's commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad. Contains those teachings about the non-touch yoga. The Sanskrit word for that is asparsha. And last week we explained a little bit about that, what non-touchism is, or touchless yoga sometimes it's called. That is, that ultimate reality cannot be seen through the senses. The sense of touch not only, but can't be touched with the eyes or touched with the ears. But in fact, you probably come closest to it when you listen to the teachings, because Vedanta, particularly Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual Vedanta, declares that the words spoken by the Acharya, or by the illumined soul, by the teacher, come the closest to describing that reality in this plane of existence. So, as we were saying this morning on satsang, if you were all joining us in that live streaming period this morning after meditation, this transmission of class through words is all about vibration. We know those most subtle vibrations are those of our mind, called vrittis in Sanskrit. Chitta vrittis, if you want to be accurate to the yoga tradition. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha is how the second sloka of Patanjali's yoga states it, that vibrations of the mind, if they're quelled, bring one very close to realization of that non-dual Brahman. So thinking process is what you're talking about here. And we just stated, may Brahman protect us, may Brahman sustain us, and may Brahman illumine our thinking process. What is it to illumine a thinking process? Probably the highest illumination, as we will see by some of the Advaita Vedanta teachings today from Gaudapada, was probably 800 AD was when he and his teachers lived. Shankaracharya, the great Advaitin, was said to be his disciple. So Gaudapada talks in terms of this non-touch yoga, and we, in order to understand the word yoga, we took a whole series of yogas, if you remember, last week, and this new chart that I put together just last week. And we looked into all the different kinds of yogas that we could fit on an 8x11. And we called it waves in the universal ocean of Brahman. To illumine the thinking process, then, we use these avenues, these roadways. If you want to put it in a certain quote, according to Patanjali, there are erratic thought waves called vrittis in the human mind, which must be pacified. Further, there are mighty waves of yoga in the ocean of pure conscious awareness, and they must be utilized for this task. So these different yogas, ways of getting into union with absolute reality, whether you want to call it Brahman or Atman or Almighty Father or Buddha Nature, Allah. To get into union with that, one needs to transcend the mind. Many of the teachings in our tradition start off with a different kind of non-touchism, isn't it? That you don't associate yourself with the body. That the body is just a vehicle, a sharira, or a sheath, a covering, a container, if you want. It's the grossest of all containers because it contains basically food, annam. It's the annamaya kosha. But that next layer of kosha is a pranamaya kosha, where man does not live by bread alone. So there's a vital energy kosha that covers that and permeates it as well. Prana is permeating this physical body, isn't it? Because we can move and we can see and we can digest food and we can breathe. Pranayama. And then permeating both of those is a mental kosha, or a mental sheath, called the manomaya kosha. This is called the Adara system of Vedanta. They want you to know about the 5 coverings. It's their way of telling you, as we were stating this morning in satsang, that you are none of those things. It's the neti-neti process. And in order to arrive at what you are, you have to know what you're not, or who you are. You have to know what you're not. If you say, I am Atman, and you still identify with the koshas, then it's going to be problematic for you. But if you can see through the koshas and you know without a doubt that you're that one thing that cannot be touched, cannot be defiled by the tongue, the hand, the gaze, or the hearing of the senses, then you're called an arhat in Buddhist times, or an illumined soul, jivan mukta, a luminary. So yoga is then all about pacifying those waves of the mind first, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. And when you talk about a sparsha yoga or non-touch yoga, you're talking about a being who has already realized that. They're not looking at the yogas in terms of practice anymore. If you remember last week, we mentioned slowly the phenomena of hatha yoga that's going on, which is the most outermost form. And then we mentioned the practice of yoga. After that, it is pranayama and study of scriptures, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, devotions, and so forth. Even karma yoga, the yoga of selfless service to God and mankind. Those are more on the level of the practice of deeper yogas. But then when you mention a non-touch yoga, you're talking about the perfect union is already at hand. We're not talking about getting into union anymore, or not even realizing that you need to get in union anymore, or even worse, that there's any such thing as getting into union. You're just a physical being, and maybe all you want to do, most people don't even want this, is to get in union with nature. But if you get in union with nature, then you're getting in union with birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. And who would want that? You want to get in union with something which is birthless, deathless, timeless, spaceless, that is transcendent of matter. And when you find out that matter has come out of your thinking process, everyone said that in the East. Lord Buddha said it, and the Gaudapada and Shankara said it, and the Diamond Sutra says it, and the Mahamudra teaching in Tibetan Buddhism says it. Everywhere you look is this idea that all phenomena are projections from the mind. So when you get to a mental yoga, Holy Mother called it mano yoga. That yoga is more current. Buddhi yoga is another way of putting it in the Bhagavad Gita. When you get to those kinds of yogas, then you're talking about a union of the mind with the word, or with higher mind. The thought waves of your mind are going to become so neutralized, as it says here, pacified, then if you stay in that thoughtless, vritti-less, vibrationless state long enough, you will see the light inside of yourself. So all of this distraction has been taking you away from that, the outward movement of things. So much that you think the outward movement is all that there is. There is nothing but the external. That's called physics, materialism, and so forth. Even if you're a sensualist, you should know that there's a difference between objects and senses. So the senses should be somewhat of an inward step for you. But if the senses are always focused out, as the Mundaka Upanishad states, basically the senses are called defective. Why? Because they're always outward going. But if the senses once turn in toward the dream senses, toward subtle senses, then you have the beginnings of a spiritual life. And that's why they want you to connect earth with smell, with the sense of smell in a dream tonight, see, or the ability to smell, the power in the nose to smell, the power in the eyes to see, the power in the ears to hear. That takes some deeper, subtler thinking on your part. And that's how you begin to illumine a mind. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. So by thinking on Brahman and applying that non-dual Brahman to everything that is apparently changing and everything that's external, you begin to refine the mind's thinking process, and that's how you illumine a thinking process. Pretty soon it's illumined, and it gets the idea, and it no more roves out and about, distracted, fragmented. In Gaudapada's Karika here, he says those beings who do not make those connections and who just drift outward and believe only in outward things, they're called nervous wrecks. That's probably the first time that phrase was used in the world. We now use it nowadays. Nervous wreck. He's a nervous wreck. So people become so distanced from their true inner nature that they begin to take on that kind of imbalance. And the mind waves have become more and more erratic, haven't they? More and more distorted, more and more fragmented. And so peace is far, far away from a mind like that. Everyone's claiming they want peace of mind, yet they won't do the homework to still that erratic vibration, to collect and gather that fragmented mindset. However you want to describe it, you need to do that distilling process, which brings things together like iron filings to a magnet. If your magnet has gotten weak, then you have to charge it up, see. And so it will attract to itself all of this far-flung material. Because objects are just thought made manifest. So by your thoughts, objects came into being. So now you want to call the objects back to the thought. See, that's meditation, right? Yoga chitta vritti, the chitta vrittis need to be quelled, need to be pacified. So as far as a practice, it's yoga that does that. And we looked at all the different yogas that can help you do that. If you're doing it through bhakti, then your mind, erratic thoughts are being stilled by your love of God, aren't they? By your devotion. Even by your doing a puja. If you're doing it through mantra yoga, then you're doing it by turning the beads and saying the Lord's name. And as long as the mantra is going on and the beads are passing through your fingers, for that long, your mind is still. Or if it isn't, you're not doing japa correctly. The very thing that should be stilling your mind, the practice of mantra and japa, is not doing its work. So there you have a problem. See, you don't believe in the power of the mantra, evidently. If you did, you'd be focusing fully on it and using it to still the mind's vibrations. Well, if you really were to get down and define peace of mind, or define shanti, 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 as we have done, the AUM of Om, and the three worlds and so forth, waking, dreaming, deep sleep, all the triputis that connect with Om. We've had charts on it, we've had teachings on it, we've had retreats on it. It's a huge subject in Vedanta, in Tantra, in yoga. So if you really get down to defining what peace of mind is, then you'd have to say, well, my mind stopped thinking. It's not brooding anymore, for one thing. It's not depressed, so there's no tamasic thoughts in it. You know tamas, right? Mr. Thomas's neighborhood and Mr. Rajas's neighborhood. You see, those two neighborhoods you want to transcend. You want to move out, pack up your belongings and move out, away from Mr. Rajas, and get into the sattvic neighborhood. See? So in that way, if the mind can stay away from brooding and stay away from depression, and then it begins active, but then it formulates a habit of activity that it can't turn off. And that's called obsession with work and so forth. And work, people are usually working to gain money so that they can get objects of pleasure and enjoy. That's basically the kind of scenario, isn't it? And even in Gaudapada's Karaka, I was saying this morning, those who know the difference between the enjoyer and the enjoyed, between the subject and the object, they can enjoy without getting attached. They can go ahead and be the master of everything. See? A of Om, you master the waking state. U of Om, you master the dreaming state. M of Om, you master the dissolution state. That's what Om means in a nutshell. You use the word to become master of everything that's come out of the word. A is creation, U is preservation, M is dissolution, right? So there it is all the time, going on in cycles, rising, playing, and falling, rising, playing, and falling. You do it every 24 hours, the kids do it every day at school. A breath does it every time you initiate it, in, held, and out. See, it's always going on like that. So you use those very things to still the mind. The breathing will help still the mind if you slow it down. If you're not breathing and it's not kumbhaka, then that's tamas. See? If you're breathing too fast, that's rajas. If you're breathing evenly, that's sattva. And if you're not breathing and it's not tamas, then that's samadhi. See? It's pretty much the way it works with the breathing process. It's called kumbhaka, where the breath stills. Where the breath catches in delight. Ram Prasad sings. See? Catches in delight at what it sees inside, because its thoughts got out of the way. See? It's always seeing the thinking mind, seeing the thoughts. When you're looking at objects, you're seeing thoughts. And you're seeing thought solidified. People think, oh, the object is different from me. It went through a billions of years evolutionary period to get to where it was, but it was always there. Not only on Earth for billions of years or millions of years, but also in your thinking process for all that time. It came out. Forests, trees, rivers, lakes, oceans, fire, air, earth, water, ether, all came out of your thinking process. Mind is the chief sense. But oh mind, you're such a petty potentate. You're the king of the senses, but you're such a petty potentate because you take for counsel the five senses. And you should be taking for counsel the Atman. See? But instead you're taking for counsel the five senses and their attachment to the object. So how can it get peace of mind that way? So if you concentrate on peace of mind, you'll find that it's pretty much the absence of brooding, the absence of depression, the absence of restless thought or frenetic thought. And then you get into balance, you find, oh, now there's peace, you see. Oh, now I can pinpoint where peace is. But it'd probably be good for you, rather than just to enjoy peace when it shows up, to analyze your mind when it was not in peace. See, that's the problem with tamas and rajas. They come in cycles and you just give in to them. It's like giving in to deep sleep tonight. Yes, you go into a kind of samadhi. It's called nidra samadhi. Nidra means sleep samadhi. You're in a formless place. There's no thoughts going on. But there's a veil of nescience or ignorance over you that Gaudapada outlines very well in his non-touch yoga and in the commentary that this came from. So this analyzation process has to go on in a very deep way and has to be consistent, day to day. You can't just think about it a little while and say, I agree with that, and then let it go. You have to not leave the Vedanta and the teachings in books and temples, as Vivekananda said, but you have to bring it into your practice and realize it. It has to become full circle so that you can then wake up out of deep sleep and know where you've been. So you begin to know what happened to the mind. And you also know that when you're in tamasic and rajasic cycles that peace was not there. And then when you got into peace, you can see how your mind shifted from rajas to sattva and began to get a little bit of rest and reflection. And then if you can hold that peace of mind 3 times, outer, inner, and transcendent, you see, 3 worlds, if you can have peace at all levels of your existence, then you'll have those early samadhis that's talked about in yoga. And you'll have these experiences of yoga, the quintessential experiences of all these yogas that we looked at last week. So we're not going to go through this again, but just to bring you back in a sort of remembrance of all the different yogas that you can use to get into peace of mind, because Holy Mother said you need peace of mind first and foremost. After that, you can think about samadhis and so forth. Now, after we looked at that, we looked at this chart, the ultimate yoga, according to Gaudapada's Karika. On this chart, it was listed up there as Advaita Yoga, right at the top, you see, right on the shoreline. And that's another way of saying non-touch yoga. It's just non-duality or Advaita. Non-origination is a word that comes out of Gaudapada's Karika. Ajativada, the path of those who know that they are unborn, that the soul is never born and never dies. It's never created and never destroyed. It's the one constant amongst changing things. That's why I chanted this morning, Nityo Nityanam, Chetanas Chetananam. It's the eternal among non-eternal things. It's the intelligence of the most intelligent ones. Who's the most intelligent ones? Shiva, Krishna, Brahma, the Trinity, the saints and seers. It's their very intelligence, with a capital I. So it reminds me, one young student came to me recently and I made an announcement, a teaching in the class. I said, you have to learn to analyze your own consciousness. So it was a new thought to him. So I said, he wrote me an email the other day and said, now I'm analyzing my thoughts. I'm actually looking at my own consciousness, and I find that I can make a choice to not think bad thoughts. He didn't even know he had that power in him for the longest time, that I can actually disallow my negative thoughts to happen. So now he's just, it's classic Vedantic evolution, spiritual evolution and of the mind, is that a person all of a sudden, by analyzing their own thoughts and their own mind, gets an objective view, whereas before they were all caught up in it. See, they had no objectivity whatsoever. They were just caught in this mind and all its thoughts. But now somebody comes along and at the right moment says, well, just analyze your consciousness, just look at it, take it out and look at it as you would take out some jewel out from its case, and like a fruit in the palm of your hand, as they say, you see, and just look at it. And all of a sudden you'll develop the power to make choices, better choices for yourself. It gives you the power of freedom. So you're on your way. So that's, I say, classic Vedantic evolution, spiritually speaking. So when we looked at the non-touch yoga as a specific chart that I I made as we pulled it out of Gaudapada's Karika. We could see here the requisites that we went through last week. First, the requisite is freedom from fear. We sang that song about we shall crush the stars to atoms and we shall unhinge the universe. And a verse of that to recall to mind how we need to be free from fear. We talked about self-control and perseverance, the jewels of Vedanta, called the 6 jewels: inner peace, self-control, and titiksha, forbearance, and so forth. That's a kind of perseverance. We talked about how to moderate desire and enjoyment. Really, how to moderate anything. Moderate your thoughts, in this case, would be one thing. If your mind is running away with you, it's saying, okay, we're going to take a break now. It's like, let's say, time out, right? First that started out in the football field, and then it got into the homes. And the children were getting too out of hand, so he said, okay, time out, young man. So you go to the corner or sit in that chair. So you should be able to do that with your mind. So, okay, I can moderate my thoughts. I'll just stop thinking for a while. It's a very good quality, very good power to have over your minds, just to stop it from thinking. The only other time you're going to get that is in deep sleep, and you really didn't do it with your willpower then. It just happened to you. It just took you over. It pulled a veil over your thinking process and made you go unconscious, see. But we want conscious non-thinking. The emptiness we're looking for, shunyata, is not the emptiness of essence, for God's sake. Tathagata, the very name for the enlightened soul in Buddhism, is that one who has gone beyond to the supreme goal. The supreme goal is that essence, garbha. It's root essence, it's called. So we can never be empty of that. What we want is to be empty of suffering. We want to be empty of name and form, empty of time and space, empty of karma. Those kinds of things are the emptiness we're looking for. So the question, who am I, can be accompanied by the question, empty of what? And that would be the person who's analyzing in this day and age. Comes to a teacher and says, ask the question, who am I? And then you hear the teaching of emptiness, and you must respond and say, empty of what, sir? What is this reality empty of? And eventually you'll find that it is empty of thoughts. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is quelling the thoughts of the mind to get into union with God. It's second sloka, second sutra of Patanjali's whole Yoga Sutras, the Raja Yoga system. And there it is, as plain as the nose on your face, spelled out for you right away at the beginning, just like any good Advaitist would do. Give them the non-dual truth first, let them put that in their mind in the background, and then start working on their mind. You see, with that as the linchpin. That's the foundation back there. So this idea of moderation then, very important in Vedanta and in Buddhism and other systems, to be able to walk the middle path, sometimes it's called. Walk the middle path. It's a very peaceful path. It's not extreme. See? It's not extreme radical, and it's not extreme irrational. See? Where you throw everything to the four winds and just throw away all caution at the same time. It's not that kind of extreme, nor is it the non-dual extreme, where great souls will rip out desires by the roots and still survive somehow. See? It's the moderate path, it's the middle path, so that's going to be a requisite for this non-touch yoga. Then awaken the mind and have samadhi. You probably see where Shankara got this from his teacher, Govindapada, and his teacher's teacher, Gaudapada, once said, and you'll find it in the Vivekachudamani, practice having samadhi. So he's asking you to kind of set it up. See? You could probably begin by setting up your deep sleep state tonight. I think when I leave dreaming and go into deep sleep, I'll take my consciousness with me this time. and I won't go unconscious. It's my consciousness after all. Why shouldn't I keep it all the time? A man has come to me from a land that never sleeps. Now all my dreams have been transformed into meditations. This is the way one song puts it. Another song puts it in the same vein, says, my whole life has become meditation on the mother, immersed in her own secret contemplation. I received this mother way from an adept of the land of non-duality, where the sun never rises and never sets. All my days and nights have become her midnight. I have taken conventional waking and conventional dreaming and have returned them to the curtain of nescience from which they sprang. Now I feel like I've been awake for 1,000 aeons. And it goes on like that. I'm trying to recall it from memory, you see. This is the lyrics of his song. Will you find lyrics like that anywhere? He sang this lyric. See, this is what he experienced. So, from a land that never sleeps comes these great souls. They've put sleep to sleep. They've put death to death. They've made fear afraid of itself. So, get freedom from fear. Awaken the mind and have samadhi. So you're going to have to set it up a little bit, you see. Are you ready to have samadhi, O mind? Are you ready? We're going to enact it. It's going to happen in the next meditation. You set it up, you see. Give your mind a psychological advantage over itself. And do it from your witness consciousness, you see. Your witness is the all-knowing, is the omniscient. That word is used in Gaudapada's Karika too. A being becomes omniscient in that way. So it's giving you permission, as it were, to have that highest state of consciousness called samadhi, because that is natural to the Paramahamsa. That's natural to the avatar. It's natural to the avadutta. It's natural to the sage and seer. It's natural to the illumined yogi. That's every man's consciousness. You see, that's common ground for them. For the rest of us, it's kind of something esoteric, you see. Oh, something that maybe I might get in many lifetimes if I practice or something, you see. But it's right at hand. It's just waiting for you, watching your every breath, watching every step you take. See? Think of it as that, inmost consciousness, that's your very nature. Now, the practice part of non-touch yoga, as we said last week, is to stabilize the mind when it's in periods of unrest. You don't have to when it's not in periods of unrest. And that's when people should be meditating, but they say, oh, I'm fine now. I don't need to meditate. But that's where you should actually be entering into your meditative state, is in that sattvic period. So in the meantime, when periods of unrest come upon you, then try and stabilize the mind at that time, because you'll be formulating muscles, subtle muscles inside of your mind. And if you achieve success in stabilizing the mind once, then it will be a great landmark for you. You'll have again that psychological advantage of knowing that you've done it once, so you can do it again. So there's a problem in yoga, one of the spiritual viparyayas, they're called, or antaryayas, some impediment, spiritually speaking, of always failing the goal. Spiritually, we're talking about. I'm not talking about the world. Trying to get samadhi and you always fail it, or trying to make spiritual progress and you're always making one step forward and two steps back. It's called backsliding. Anavastitattvani. And that kind of impediment. So what you want to do is replace that with the samskara, or the impression of having success. in spiritual practice. So you want to take something up and doggedly and ruthlessly adhere to it until you succeed in it. And it's one of the great things that Sri Ramakrishna taught us in this lifetime. He lived in the 1800s. He taught us the motherhood of God. And he taught us the universality of all religions. Those two things are like pillars in his Leela, Ramakrishna Leela. But there's this other thing he taught us. When you take something up, never give it up until you succeed in it. Or else you'll begin to form a habit of failure. And it's very, very hard to get over, especially spiritually. So what you want to do is take something up and, with good guidance from your teacher and from the scriptures, adhere to it until you gain success in it, and then develop a habit of success. You'll find out that holds you in good stead for the rest of your days in spiritual practice. You'll be making 2 steps forward and 1 step back. You'll change the equation. And then, of course, progress will be made. Whether you get enlightenment or not is almost a matter of divine grace, isn't it? If she gives me samadhi, she could give it to me right now, even if I'm a fool. So it's up to her. It's up to the divine grace. But as far as spiritual growth, that's up to me. And I can call upon her, on the Divine Mother, or on the Blessed Lord of the Universe, to help me to remove impediments. In fact, that's what my Guru does. It's a form of Divine Lord and Divine Mother that helps me remove the impediments so that you can walk the path. And of course, that's what we were just saying, when these vibrations go across the ethers and hit your eardrums, then there's 2 channels there. One goes to the mind and one goes to the heart. If you have the open mind, universal mind, and you have the loving heart, then those vibrations that have gone across the air from the mouths and lips of your teachers will go in and they'll find happy homes. You see, 2 wings of the bird, jnana and bhakti, heart, mind and heart. Universal mind, loving heart. And that will prove to you the efficacy of vibration, positive vibration. So, back to I'm giving you the solution for the problem. The problem, though, back to that, is this unrest, periods of unrest that come upon everyone. They can, even amongst great souls, they can be called dark night of the souls or whatever. But there are these periods of unrest and problem. And if you can stabilize while you're in the midst of those, that's both a Buddhist teaching, Tibetan Buddhist, Mahamudra, and it's also Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta teaching found here in Gaudapada. They say Gaudapada's great commentary, which has been lauded by Eastern and Western philosophers alike, it's become famous, is really a combination of his influence by the Bhagavad Gita and the Advaita Vedanta systems and his study of Buddhist scriptures. So you've got, in Gaudapada's Karka, you have those 3 influences really, Gita, Buddhism, and Advaita Vedanta. And when you get an amalgam together like that, because before Gaudapada, Nagarjuna was teaching, so he had borrowed some things from one of these greatest Buddhist philosopher, and he had come up with his ideas about firming up the teaching of emptiness, for instance. I'll show you a little bit about that in a while, how the Advaita Vedanta doesn't call objects empty on the relative plane. It only calls them empty on the absolute plane. So it's not like, say, the Yogacara schools of Buddhism, which say objects are empty, illusory on both planes. They're just completely illusory. Advaita Vedanta doesn't go for that. It says they're real here on this plane, but they're not real on the absolute plane. So ultimately they're not real. They will agree with some of the Buddhist schools on that, but that's called Paramarthika and Vyavaharika. That's how Gaudapada and Shankara called them. That's non-dualism and empiricism, if you want to put it in English words. Empiricism means the world of name and form and time and space, the changes and everything. Those seem real to you as long as you're in them. But when you get up into samadhi, we're saying awaken the mind and have samadhi, you'll find out all those things are beginning to fall away. They're not plaguing you anymore. They're not, your mind is not entertaining thoughts about them. And I'm giving you to this in a kind of gradated way, you see. And then finally, they have no place in the mind whatsoever, completely illumined. Gaudapada has another teaching about that on another chart I'll show you in a minute, but let's finish this chart up first. So that's a very powerful teaching. Stabilize the mind during times of unrest. I get messages in the email and so forth all the time from students who are saying, I'm going through a very hard time. I can't really go right back and tell them good. That's what my teacher would have said. Good. That's what the Tibetan lamas will tell you. Good. That's a good thing you're going through that. Lex Hickson, our founder, used to say that too. That's good. It's a good time to work now. Because now you see the problem, you see. But the thing is, and this is where yoga helps you again, you don't react to the problem. You just note it. So that's where stabilizing the mind in periods of unrest, you'll begin to build some witness consciousness around it. So next time a negative phase does come around in your life, whether it's in your outer circumstances or whether it's in your mind, because both will affect both ways, won't they? Mind and life will both get affected. Then you'll be able to stand back from them and say, this will pass. It's a great step to take in your spiritual growth. It will pass. All things must pass. That's almost a mantra in itself. It's just a matter of whether or not you're waited out or whether you can transcend it quickly. If you wait it out, then it's a matter of how long do I have to wait? Do I have some sort of say in how long this will take? See? And the answer is, of course, yes, you do. You could right away lift yourself out of depression, right away lift yourself out of problems and brooding, if you had the wherewithal to do so. And somewhere inside of there you do. So you have to prove it to yourself. That's what I'm saying. So these requisites of non-touch yoga prove to you or state to us that non-touch yoga isn't some transcendental dream or plateau that we'll never reach for many lifetimes. They're telling you how to practice it right now. It's the Advaita Vedanta sadhana, which is kind of a contradiction in terms, because Advaita Vedanta, once it's reached, has no sadhana. There's just the perfection of the self. But you cannot pretend that. You have to enter into some kind of practice, and you won't find an aspirant after the Advaita Vedanta doing hatha yoga and breathing exercises. They've long passed that stage. So what they're doing is the upper limbs of yoga. They're learning how to concentrate, meditate, and have samadhi. Those are particular to that asparsha yoga, to that non-touch yoga. You're learning how to withdraw the mind from everything that has a vibration. So in satsang this morning, that's what we said. If it has a vibration, it's not Brahman. And so you can take that two ways, positively and negatively. And both of those are positive, by the way. If you take it negatively, it's called neti-neti. And you're following the vibration, you're using it as a gauge to assure yourself that what you're experiencing is not Brahman. So anytime my mind is thinking, then I'm not in a state of non-dualism. There's an object at the base of the thought, or there's a person at the base of the thought, or there's a deity at the base of the thought. It's a vibration. And that's gradated. If there's a deity at the base of your thought, that's called ishtanishta, and you're in good hands. But it's still a vibration. Ishvara is still a vibration. And what you're seeking is a non-touch state, a state of absolute transcendence, which is not empty but full. Full, full, full. Purnamadaha, purnamidam, purnat purnamanachate. So you're doing a one-upmanship on shunyata. You're getting purnyata. And this is true Advaita Vedanta. So the methods and the qualifiers are all very subtle in this yoga, as you can see. And it finally ends in attain the goal. A lot of this is almost giving the soul permission to do things it never thought it could do. But that's the problem with affirmation. You say, guess I'll be Brahman now. Not going to work. See? The mind is not set up for it. It's not prepared for it. Well, I guess I'm perfect after all. Then you go and make some error right away, you see. So it's not going to work, is it? So you really have to set the mind up for this innate perfection that is your true nature. And these requisites list very well how to do that. And you're very cautious and very careful, like in any yoga. The things you have to watch out for are listed there nicely too. Desire, depression, and stabilizing the mind during unrest and so forth. So we looked at that last week, but I had more to say about it, evidently. So we go through it again today in an even different way. Now let's look at the results of non-touch yoga, because any good system will tell you there are qualifiers and then there are also results, fruits that come about from your practice. So here it is here in this oval. The fruits of non-dual practice, or the results of the non-touch yoga. First one is secures right knowledge. This is almost like the Eightfold Path of Buddha, isn't it? One of those, Samyak Jnana it's called, is one of the Eightfold Path of Buddha, is to secure right knowledge. Then, well, of course, I don't really have to tell you what right knowledge is. If you've been sitting in my classes and listening long enough, you know that it's called paravid, not aparavid. Aparavid is not wrong knowledge, because there's no such thing as false knowledge. There's just lower knowledge and higher knowledge. Any kind of knowledge, if you look into it, will benefit you. If it's ignorance, then that's a very low form of knowledge, but that ignorance will let you know that you're ignorant. It's a dead giveaway, you see. And so pretty soon you'll start saying, we don't proceed from falsity to higher truth. We proceed from lower truth to higher truth. That's how Vivekananda reinterpreted that saying, Asato ma sadgamaya, when he came to the West. They were saying, lead me from falsity to truth. He said, no, that's not the idea. Lead me from lower truth to higher truth. Because the 7 lower stages of knowledge, one by one, if you look at that, it's really a teaching of Lord Vashishta. And if you might have remembered on a chart, the Agyana Bhumikas, there are actually 7 lands of lower wisdom, lower knowledge, false knowledge that gradate themselves until finally one begins to see one of the characteristic parts of that is begins to see the world in a dream, as a dream. So you can almost equate that with what people are saying nowadays about deja vu and so forth. I really have these feelings that there's something more to life. I'm having these remembrances of places I've been, or beings I've been, personalities I've been, that don't equate with anything I've ever experienced in this particular life. They're coming out of some other deeper part of me. So that's what the culminating step of lower knowledge, before you get to the 7 higher realms of knowledge, called the Jnana Bhumikas. It's a very beautiful study, all inset with the jewels of different fruits, just like this is. So when you get right knowledge, then you've graduated from aparavidya to paravidya. In other words, you've used science and arithmetic and mathematics and arts and crafts and all these forms of aparavidya, lower knowledge, to prepare the ground for knowledge of scripture, knowledge of the words coming from the preceptor's lips, and your own contemplation of the words, and your own realization of the words, Shruti, Yukti, and Anubhava, as we were saying this morning in Satsang. And that's setting you up for the realm of Paravid. Another way of putting it is you're graduating out of Maya into Mahamaya. You've given up lower mantras, like how's the weather, or how are you, and you've taken on higher mantras, like Om Namah Shivaya, and then maybe even taken on a Mahavakya, like that thou art, Tat Tvamasi, or Aham Brahmasmi, this self is Brahman, I am Brahman. So all different gradations of knowledge are there, even in the higher knowledge. level. See, but you had to have worked your way through the lower knowledge first and qualified yourself again. That is one of the first fruits, one of the first signs that you're gaining success in the non-touch yoga. Second sign is non-attachment. That's funny. Non-attachment via mature discernment. Your discrimination begins to get honed. You can turn things away without second thought, things that aren't good for you. And you have a power over your desires, over your negativities. You can see where it comes from: self-control and perseverance, right? So that's going to culminate in mature discernment. Now you can easily turn away anything that's of a negative variety, or anything that may waylay you on your path. It's almost like a foresight. Oh, if I do that, this will happen. You see, I've been there, done that, not going there again. This time I think I'll sidestep that detour and just be myself. Do the wise thing, you see. Next, you can shower beneficence on all creatures. Beneficent being, not a malignant being, showering evil and problems and everything on people. And not even a sort of selfish being who's just making growth for themselves and devil take the hindmost, as they say. But actually, you can become a blessing to yourself, to your society, to your family, and to your spiritual circle and so forth. And that's another sign of success in the non-touch yoga. Freedom from dispute and opposition. That happens a little bit different to the disciple than to the guru. But I can testify myself that I've never had arguments with people around my particular perspective. It's as if the non-touch yoga or Advaita yoga doesn't invite arguments, not even with oneself. As if you become your own devil's advocate and you take a teaching, you say, I doubt that, then something else inside of the teaching will come forward and saying, I can prove it to you. And that's what happens in your own mind. Your own mind gives up its own penchant to debate with itself. You know what that's called in Tantra? Tarkika buddhi, the intellect that argues. And we're not talking about the intellect that just argues with other people. That's bad enough. But we're talking about the doubting intellect, the doubting Thomas kind of thing. And it's not like Daifunshi in Zen. That's called the great doubt. That's a whole different kind of doubt. You're doubting the existence of the world in that kind of doubt. You're doubting the existence of God even. But in this kind of doubt, it's very menial and very, very base, you see. It's just arguing for the sake of arguing. And the ego has that penchant. You see, it wants to do that. And it can't come to any conclusion. Siddhanta. Om Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagad Cha. I have come to the conclusion, Vedanta concludes that all this is Brahman. Time, space, living beings in the world, it's all Brahman. End of story. So when you have declarations that are that powerful, coming from hundreds and thousands of minds of the seers and rishis and yogis who have practiced these traditions for hundreds and thousands of years, what can you, a mere argumentative ego, say about it, you see? You have to stand back and give up the penchant for arguing and just say, I accept, I accept. And Sri Krishna says that in the Gita to Arjuna, when you give up carping and cavilling, I can teach you these things. And to you, my devotee who does not argue, I will teach you these things. Listen. Just open your heart and your mind and listen. So otherwise it's not possible, you see. And as a teacher, I've had that kind of experience too, trying to teach people whose minds are already shut or their hearts are already closed. It's not going to work. That's strewing pearls before swine. So I'm speaking of this particular fruit, freedom from dispute and opposition, from the standpoint of a teacher. Now, from the standpoint of a student, all of you would be better just equipped to explain your experiences with arguing with people about different ways of life, different philosophies. Your own path, for instance. You'll run into people who will doubt your path. Not only people who are worldly, who doubt spirituality and the existence of God, called atheists, but you'll run in with people from other sampradayas, from other darshanas, from other religions, from other philosophies, and they'll want to argue with you about what you believe. And you'll find out that that's pretty baseless, because if you take a universal view and you see how many yogas there are, then you're going to, if you're a wisdom seeker and you run into a bhakta, you're going to say, oh, that's a wonderful path you've got there. I wish I had more of it. See, share some of your bhakti with me, because I could use a little bit of moistening here. My jnana is beginning to get a little dry, you see. Share some of your moisture with me. And then a person who's practicing the bhakti path will say, well, my bhakti is getting a little bit emotional. Would you share some of your wisdom with me? Dry out some of my tears? See, I'm a little too moist. So that's the two wings of the bird again. That's the sharing. That's the universal approach, not the argumentative approach. So some words about this from both levels, the level of a teacher, the level of a practitioner. And I didn't mean to pass over realization of the highest happiness. You certainly don't want to pass that over. That means, of course, bliss. That's one of the fruits that comes to you. Father of Yoga also talks about it, but he cautions about it. It's one of the four potential impediments in yoga. The first is laziness of mind. Mostly in meditation he's talking about. The second is restlessness of mind. Those tamas and rajas. See? So those are the first two real impediments in your spiritual practice. The inadvertence, to do it. You don't want to do it. I don't want to keep it up day to day. I don't want to do what my teacher told me. I don't believe in this. Somewhere in there, the doubting Thomas is alive and well in the territory of your mind. And then restlessness. You don't want to do it because chanchala vritti, I can't stay in one position. So when you see me on live streaming, I'm staying in one position for 3 hours. Can you stay in one position for 3 hours and just think about God? That's what you're being trained to do here. And if you can do it once, you can do it again, and then you can do it for years, and pretty soon that's all you want to do, is just remain in balance. And that's how I got it from my teacher. When I saw my teacher, I saw that he was in one mood all the time. He was in one state of consciousness all the time. Not that he couldn't scold you from that one state and smile at you from that one state, but he was in the non-touch yoga, you see. And you saw that, and you marveled at it, and you said, I want that. That's what I want. And I've always wanted that. I was born with that desire. So I'm going to satisfy it here. I found an exemplar. So finding the exemplar, then you begin to measure yourself up to him. These are the requisites, and then this would be the fruits that you're going to get out of it. So it's it's an Advaitic system, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have landmarks to it. It doesn't mean it doesn't have finger holds up that steep slope. It doesn't mean that you can't storm the gates of some supreme goal, Tathagata Garbha, gone beyond to the highest goal, which is an essence inside of you. So that highest happiness is called bliss. So that would be the fourth of these spiritual impediments. You have to check out that bliss to make sure it's just not my bliss, but it has to become the universal bliss. And that's the difference between mudita, say, joy, and which is a sentinel, you see, and bliss, ananda, which is unalloyed, uninterrupted bliss. That's how they describe it. Unalloyed means has no other material in it but just pure bliss. And uninterrupted means the seer is in it all the time. That one state. And it doesn't matter what happens around in the world. how many thousands of people die and how many thousands of people are born makes no never mind to that state of unalloyed, uninterrupted bliss, ananda. If a man had a telegram and he went to the Ramakrishna Math or mission, and the telegram was for Mr. Ananda, he'd walk in and he'd say, "Would Mr. Ananda please step forward?" And 1,000 monks would stand up. "I'm Mr. Ananda." It's their last name. You get my drift? They have reached that state of unalloyed, uninterrupted bliss. Enough said. Realization of the highest happiness is yours. When you start feeling that, then you'll know the non-touch yoga is working for you. Freedom from dispute and opposition, we said something about that. Then transcendence of desire and non-desire. And you might as well add in there any other duality that you can think of. At this level, though, the dualities are getting very, very subtle. It's not like the duality of pleasure and pain, or good and bad. Those are very, very base dualities that you should take care of at an initial level. But the dualities of bondage and liberation, say, that's a good duality to contemplate at a high level. See, asking yourself, am I bound? When did I become bound? How did I become bound? And then some teaching from Advaita comes along and said, no, you're ever free, never bound. Now the great doubt comes up, you see. And you're going to argue with it. If I'm so ever free and never bound, then how come I feel bound? See? And what can I do to get unbound? How can I become boundless? I want the non-touch yoga which will make me boundless and boundaryless. So you begin reasoning in this way, and you kick yourself, your way out of that paper bag, that wet paper bag of ignorance. And bondage and liberation are just like thorns. One's in your flesh, you take the other out with it and you toss them both away. And you're in an ever-free state. Or take form and formlessness and meditate on that. That's another very, very high duality. So here's another high duality he's mentioning here, desire and non-desire. It sort of echoes the teaching of Samvedana from ancient times, Yoga Vishishta. That is, non-receptivity to desire. See how it's like moderating desire and enjoyment. See, it's an effect of one of these. It's a fruit of one of these causes, one of these practices. So you're going to come to a place where you can sidestep your desires, especially those desires which you know from a past experience are going to lead you into suffering. The pleasure and pain duality again. So you develop an ability to be your own best guide. This is where the mind becomes its own guru. Don't do this at home, kids, and don't do this too early. But Ramakrishna said in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the mind will become its own guru eventually. First, you light your torch on the teacher and the exemplar and so forth, and develop this right knowledge, you see. And then you just start moving forward in it, and soon, sure enough, pretty soon your mind is making the right choices. And that's a great step in your spiritual life, isn't it? Great step of success you've gleaned. Well, you want to have that all the time. Always make the right choices. In fact, making the smallest error rubs you wrong. This is the problem with advanced spiritual life, advanced practitioners, that if they do make a little error, a little mistake, or they notice something, it's 3 or 4 times more intense than it would have been if they were less advanced. That same error would have seemed much more allowable, but this is not allowable at this level. So it's like Sri Ramakrishna is saying, take a white paper and say, oh, that's my mind, pure white. Put it up to a light, you start seeing all these black specks in it, you see. So this is where you're getting to a level of non-touch yoga, that this desire and non-desire begin to get measured against that great light. And you'll also find out, as Holy Mother has taught us, that there are some desires that lead you to dispassion, and some desires which are unhealthy for you. So you're beginning to make a division. See, that's one problem in the Western sector with the advent of Buddhism, Vedanta, the great teaching from the monks and monastics and so forth, is that you must get rid of desire. So they think, oh, well then all desire is bad. But desire for enlightenment, or desire for God realization, desire for successful meditation, what about those desires? Those certainly can't be bad. So you have to begin to use your own discrimination, right? And your discernment. See, it's right there. And then you can find out which desires are allowable and which aren't. And then eventually you can get to this higher level of desire and non-desire. Wouldn't it be nice if I didn't even need the desires that are good for me? They only lead to dispassion, but what about having dispassion? See, that's non-desire. And that's a very, very natural state that the illumined soul arrives at. And they just walk around free. You have to kind of maybe imagine what that's like. See, what would it be like to be without desire? It's not so hard to imagine. It's not as hard to imagine as what it would be like to be in an ocean of light with no ego. That's hard to imagine, you see. Mm-hmm. That is to happen to you. But to imagine to be desireless, that's something very worthy, and it's not that far out of your reach. Today's imagination is tomorrow's vision, as my teacher used to say. And tomorrow's vision is next week's realization. So you can start out with this imagination and turn it into envisionment, and from envisionment then you go to realization of the thing as it is. So again, you use the mind and guide it in stages like that. Finally, culmination of all processes in Brahman. And if you read Gaudapada's Karika on the Mandukya Upanishad, you will find him emphasizing that more than most of the rest of this, is that all processes, he'll just pretty much repeat it for you several times in different ways, how all processes are in Maya, they're not in Brahman. Brahman doesn't have a process. It doesn't change, it doesn't grow, it doesn't act, it doesn't move. And you begin to then all of a sudden understand, which is very hard for the Westerner to do, especially in this day and time, that there is something that's inactive and motionless and thoughtless, pure and perfect. And the seers have been calling that for, well, at least 1400 years, non-touch yoga. Asparsha yoga. We'll repeat this quote and then we'll move to another aspect of the yoga. When there is no thought, when there is no taking up, no giving up, at that time, knowledge of the self is well set in itself and non-originated and remaining equal at all times. This is verily what is known as the non-touch yoga by name, very difficult of realization by ordinary yogis. So the practitioners who call themselves yogis and yoginis, they're not going to understand this at first. It's going to be something that they'll have to take the word of an illumined soul who's experienced it. That's where Guru and the scriptures are your most powerful friends. You don't want to be without those. You need an authentic teacher who shows the four signs, a Kamahata, a Vrijana, a Stotriya, and Brahmavittama. Must have no desire for you other than you get enlightened. Number one, must live a pure, unostentatious life. Must know the scriptures and be able to transmit the essence of the scriptures to you, and must be a knower of Brahman. If the teacher has those four qualifications, then you're in good hands. Then he'll tell you, read this scripture, read that scripture. Ignorance is fast waning. It's on its way to its own grave as soon as that begins to happen. See? Every student knows that somewhere in their heart. Now it's just a matter of how much ignorance is in there and how much have I accented it over my lifetimes. How dense is it? How much house cleaning do I have to do? You see, I've cleaned all of the first 3 floors, but there's something called an attic. See, the attic is the mind, you see, not addict. That's down here, you see. Attic, you see, that's the mind. It needs some high cleaning, some cleaning in high places. So there's where these kinds of teachings will come in and stand you in good stead. Non-touch yoga, it's much like these slokas that we sing about sometimes. Upadau yata vedata samaninam tada vedata buddhi vedeshu tepi yata chandrakanam jale chanchalatvam tata chanchalatvam tavapiha vishno Om. We always chant Om after those scriptures. This is Hasta Amalaka. He says, like the lustrous gem which assumes the outline of its backdrop, or the stationary moon that undulates on the surface of a rippling lake, so too does the formless and all-pervading reality appear everywhere, in everything, while remaining boundless and ever free, untainted by any of its associations. So, untainted, untouched, you see, cannot be touched. The moon isn't touched when its reflection ripples in the surface of a lake, is it? The gem stays the same even though it has an outline, the atmosphere behind it, you see. It's enclosed in an outline. But it still stays the lustrous gem. And formless reality, just like that, although it associates with different things, never changes. And that's one of the great keys to Advaita Vedanta. If you can, as I was just saying, as a Western person, understand aparinama and ajativada, and that the one changeless reality assumes forms without changing itself, then you've got a good start on non-touch yoga. You've got a very good grasp on Advaita yoga. Pretty much have the essence there. Now it's just going to have to put it in the attic and let it do its work. See? It's going to chase everything out, all the bats out of the belfry. See? Mm-hmm. And it's only going to leave that light of Brahman shining there. It'll do its work, you just have to plant it there. So some of these beautiful stotrams are there in that regard. Now we have enough time then to pursue on to some of these other teachings. One of the things that when we talk about things that seem to be changing is this Atman, and I wanted to read to you with this chart in view what Gaudapada has to say about it in his inimitable way. In his second prakarana on this 4 prakaranas of the Gaudapada's Karaka, he has a section called Atman and its Maya. So both Shankara, his student, and Gaudapada left this equation open for Maya. That's how Advaita Vedanta will explain the inexplicable. The apparent formulation of worlds, the apparent taking on of names and forms, the apparent changes, the apparent transformations things go through that don't change the essence, but only happen in the external. That's Maya's realm, see. Time, space, name, form, causality, changes, transformations are all taking place apparently in that Mayic realm, or in the realm of Vyavaharka, empiricism. But number one, not only does it not change the underlying substratum, as we had this morning if you were watching the satsang, we're talking about the basic underlying substratum, like a stage for a dancer. Everything moves on the stage, but the stage remains unmoved and the same. So not only does it undergo those changes, but that Maya belongs to it too. It imagines itself by its own Maya. That's how Gaudapada puts it. So he says here, the shining Atman imagines himself by himself through his own Maya. It is that alone that cognizes entities. That's the conclusion of the Upanishads. The Atman in its dynamic phase diversifies other entities, those differently set up and those fixed within the mind. Thus does the Lord imagine. Thoughts and dualities existing within are also mere products of the imagination, and differentiation between the two is not due to any other reason, that is, other than the imagination. All things existing without and within are products of the imagination, their differentiation being due to association with the organs of the senses. Like, everyone look at me now and press your eyeballs. With one eye open, press the eyeball. You see two of me? Do you see me distorted? That's an exercise Gaudapada uses. That's how unreliable the senses are. I can see one person sitting there, but I look at you, press right there, now I see two of you, one up above the other, you see. Mm-hmm. So that's how unreliable the senses are, that you can just merely modify them with a slight touch and everything is changed. As a rope not correctly ascertained in the dark is imagined to be possessed of the attributes of a snake, so likewise is Atman imagined to be all sorts of other things. When a rope is ascertained as itself, all imagined attributes turn away and truth emerges. So likewise takes place with the ascertainment of the Atman. That is, when you realize the true self, and all of these other things that you attributed to it will fall away. Angels, devils, gods, goddesses, people, babies, nature, trees, whatever it is, all those will fall away, and you'll see nothing but the Atman. But the forester was out in the forest, and his Atman was the forest, you see. The mother, her Atman was the baby, see. So you're taking the Atman and turning it into all sorts of different things, but it never changes. Atman is imagined to be prana and other innumerable entities. This is the Maya of the Atman, which even the Atman itself becomes deluded by. Atman is taken to be prana by the knowers of prana, elements by the earthbound, gunas by the knowers of the gunas, principles by the knowers of principles, words and meanings, objects, lokas, gods, Vedas, sacrifices, enjoyment, objects of enjoyment. It is taken to be subtle, gross, as having four quarters, as knowers, as mind, as intellect. It is taken as thought, as merit and demerit, as dharma and adharma. It is taken to be constituted of 24, 25, 26, 31, and 32 principles. It is taken to be unending. It is taken to be jivas, embodied beings. It is taken to be the ashramas. It is taken to be symbols. It is taken to be male, female, and neuter. It is taken to be higher and lower, as creation, as dissolution, and as subsistence. All of these are imagined in respect of the Atman. Whatever entity is presented to a person, he sees that entity, and that entity, having assumed his form, protects him. Strong attachment to that form then encompasses him. So this is what people are calling my truth and your truth. See? If you don't know anything about the Atman, or if you don't even want to use the word and you just replace it with reality, then you say, that's my reality and that's your reality, and then you're causing a distinction. But the Atman doesn't change in any of those things. It remains the same. You're just superimposing different forms, objects, thoughts, names over it. It remains the same. There it is in the middle, the Paramatman, supreme. And here's all the things that I just read in those few slokas of Gaudapada's Karika, plus a few more. Atman is imagined further to be non-existing entities, but these entities are also imagined by the non-dual. Therefore, non-duality alone is auspicious. So those things that you can imagine in your mind, like outer space beings and so forth, that too is being imagined by the Atman. So only non-duality is auspicious, he says. Everything is concluded in it. There can be nothing outside of it. Having known this Atman, one should fix the mind and memory on non-duality. Having secured non-duality, one should carry on worldly activities as if one was insensate. Having realized it, one should never slip away from it whatsoever. And that ends that particular section of the second prakarana. So he simultaneously reads the riot act on Maya and then maintains that non-dual position of the Atman being the underlying substratum of all of those things. And all of them being imagined by its own power. Maya is its own power of imagining. And that's how things appear. In other parts of the Karaka, he's talking about the appearance of objects in the waking state and the objects in the dream state, and how they're both really the same. In the waking state, we see sciences come along and said how objects are just vibrating particles, so they're really empty. In the dreaming state, he talks about the Gandharva castle in the sky. Gandharva is a celestial being, celestial musician. So in dream states, you can have these cloud castles in the sky, and poof, they're gone when you wake up. You created them, there they were, they seemed real to you, you woke up, poof, they're all gone. Or you can live a long lifetime in a dream, see. And then all of a sudden wake up and all your children and your grandchildren that were in that dream are gone. See? And he's saying that there's no difference between that and this lifetime, waking state. Also, your children and grandchildren will be gone to you when you pass. So how has time taken it and stretched it out, make it seem real in the waking state? In the dreaming state, it's all truncated into just a brief few hours. So, therefore, he concludes, the waking and dreaming state are non-different from one another. Non-different. And they're both illusory. So, you need to work your way towards the formless state, where everything is abiding and non-changing. There you'll see the Atman in its own glory. Here you'll see all of these sublations, all of these modifications, all of these false superimpositions, all of these conditionings, all of these imaginings, all these illusions, all of these dreams. They're not real, like a cloud castle in the sky. So I wanted to show you this chart briefly in accordance with that. And I think the quote's there. All entities are by nature calm and unoriginated from the very outset, of the nature of nirvana itself. But there is indeed no self-confidence in those who move about believing in an illusory world of differences. Those who hold to this doctrine descend into a world fraught with differences. They are traditionally known as nervous wrecks, and they're very pitiable. So, are you one of them? Moving about in a world of differences, fraught with these illusory appearances, believing them to be real? Or can you stand back from it and see via the vehicles of these particular yogas, and this particular non-touch yoga, the Advaita yoga, the underlying substratum, can you comprehend this? See? Can you put it into practice? Can you practice the yoga of non-touch, sparsha? Won't it be the best for you? Now, with the remaining few minutes, would be a little premature to jump into the next chart I have to show you, so I think we'll break slightly early, and during the break, as usual, the live streaming audience can take a closer look at the two charts we've looked at in the first half of this class. So here we will return in about 10 or 15 minutes for the second half of today's live streaming class. Namaste. Om Bhadram, Om Bhadram, Karnabhihi Srinayama Devaha, Bhadram Pasyema Akshabir Yajatraha, Stirai rangayishtushtuvam sastanavir vyashema devahitam yadayahu. May we see with these eyes what is good and spiritual. May we hear with these ears what is noble and uplifting. And may we, while worshipping the Lord and Mother, with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.
Bhaja Govindam Buddhamate Samprapte Samnite Kale Nahi Nahi Rakshati Dukrin Kalme Kade Kanta Kaste Putraha Samsaro Yamativa Vichitraha Kashyatvam Kaha Kutayata Statvam Chintayata Niha Prataha Bhaja Govindam Bhaja Govindam Bhaja Govindam Buddhamate Samprapte Samnihite Kale Nahi Nahi Rakshati Dukrin Kalme Satsangatve Nisangatvam Nisangatve Nirmohatvam Nirmohatve Nischalatatvam Nischalatatve Jivan Mukti Bhaja